now move straight away to the event today. And the first speaker, as we already mentioned, is Professor Abhijit Gupta, School of Cultural Text and Records of Jadavpur University. Abhijit has been manning the South Asia hub of the EAP project. He has been working on this EAP project for a long, long time. In that way, he's a pioneer in the Indian context on how to run and how to successfully execute the EAP project of British Library. So there is no one better than him to share his experiences about the EAP project, its research value, and other dimensions connected to research. So I request Abhijit to take his seat, and I also request Dr. Prof to formally greet Professor Abhijit Gupta.
Thank you, Professor Goho. I am no stranger here. I have been here on several occasions, so it feels very familiar and warm and a welcoming place to. But it is a great pleasure and honor to be asked to speak as part of this colloquium. I think I should correct on this slightly. I am not at all a pioneer in this field. SCTR is. SCTR had started archiving and digitization from about for the last 20 years. Mr. Shubhanta Chaudhary, Shapul Chakraborty and others, Omlan Das Gupta were all directors at various points of time. They had been instrumental in a number of digitization projects. I have just begun recently, and in fact, last year, along with you, we also received an EAP project where we are digitizing the papers of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry reports and reports of the Tea Board and Jute Board. Of course, we have a number of trained project fellows at SCTR who have been doing this for a very long time, so they are much better versed at this. I hardly have to do anything. I mean, they know how to execute and run a project. But there is this other aspect of digitization, which I think you very rightly, Professor Purvastha pointed out, and that is research aspect. And that is something, it is very heartening to see, and I think this is a model which everyone should follow, that along with digitization, there should also be at least a beginning as far as researching on that material is concerned. Now that does not always happen. I mean, I think the SCTR itself has often digitized, but we have not yet really paid attention to research. There was a reason for that. We expected our task to primarily be that of creating digital archives, which then would be used by researchers. But this again takes a little bit of time. People immediately do not begin to do research. Digital archives are something which people are still getting used to in many ways. And in this context, I think one of the things which I was thinking about, especially this particular project on the papers of Mahavati Society, which are of course multifarious and in a number of languages. But it is also, you see, the formation of these organizations, among which Mahavati Society, I think, was 1891, but this decade, the decade of the 1890s and 1910s, was particularly rich in the formation of similar-minded organizations, which also had a name which is not dissimilar to the EAP, in that to recover the heritage and history which was then in danger of being lost. So we know that, I know very little about this, but whatever little one can see, that Mahavati Society was formed out of an impulse to save the Buddhist heritage, particularly in Sarnath, and the kind of challenges that they were facing. And in many cases, for example, if you take the two major organizations which were founded in 1893, the Bongyo Sahitya Parishad in Bengal and the Nagari Pracharini Sabha in Kashi, both of which had very similar aims. To recover, on the one hand, the national heritage, national literature, in the case of Bongyo Sahitya Parishad, both its material and immaterial archives, as the very famous address by Ramendra Sundar Trivedi, where he talked about both what was available, but what was also not that material, the songs of boatmen, the riddles which were spoken by women. How do you recover and restore or conserve that material? Likewise, the Kashi Nagari Pracharini Sabha's aims to create a movement in favor of the Nagari script over the Kaithi Hindi, or indeed Samskrita Sahitya Parishad 1916, which has also been mentioned. So all of these organizations, it seems, and those who are students of this particular historical moment will perhaps be able to explain this better, but came out of a particular need to, recover and preserve a history which might have been endangered in that sense. Now, but it now seems that these organizations themselves have an archive which needs to be. So it is an interesting sort of lineage to see how at that point print perhaps was then the vehicle of that particular preservation. So we know here that this project is seeking to digitize printed English material primarily, but also Pali material. I don't need to tell this audience that Pali was also becoming part of the university curriculum. 1907, Calcutta University's Pali department was founded, and a number of great scholars emerged out of it. But this was, again, I think we might be able to describe this period as print conserving a manuscript or an oral heritage. One technology trying to preserve the other. Here we are looking at another technological that would remove the digital technology trying to preserve print and also archive and manuscript sources. So I think at every point of a revolution, when communication takes place, it has to, in a sense, its task is to preserve the previous, the technology which has just been superseded. Though it's not entirely been superseded, no technology entirely replaces the other. We know that when print came into being, not just in South Asia but also in Europe, it did not immediately replace script. Script continued to survive for a very long period. In the case of South Asia, it's even more so. We are in a somewhat remarkable scenario where four major modes of communication or communication technology, orality, literacy, orality, script, print, and the digital word coexist in India side by side, which is not very common in other parts of the world, where, for example, print is almost, the print with letterpress printing, and even within letterpress there are two kinds of printing.
In progress.
Okay. So orality, literacy, script, letterpress printing, and digital, if you think of 5 different technologies. So at every stage of technological change, there are some losses and some gains. And sometimes the losses are not always visible. For example, we think of the analog material, which is printed material, is actually remarkably durable. If you think of manuscripts, both in written as well as printed, they have survived sometimes for thousands of years. The digital archive, on the other hand, is enables us to record and proliferate, but it also, there are forces that can select that unnaturally against it. I mean, digital archive can crash, or they can be the, recently British Library itself has suffered a very, very severe cyber attack, and much of its digital corpora is still not yet to become online. So it is also, we also have to be careful about when we shift from one technology to the other. We can't talk about technological obsolescence, but also it is important to conserve the older technology as well as investing and in newer modes of technology. Now we have digital technology. 20 years later, we might have some other modes of storage, even more powerful, more sophisticated modes of storage. So it is also necessary for us to make these transitions from one mode to the other. At one period of time in the 20th century, the microform and the microfilm were thought to be the next generation of, but how quickly that they became obsolete. So again, it became a challenge to transition from all the material that had been microfilm and microform to the digital archive. And even in the case of digital archive, we see one of the things is, it is not enough to digitize, it has to be preserved at least in 2 forms, both in offline and online versions. So you have something on the cloud, but you also need to preserve them physically on hard disk drives and so on and forth, so that if the cloud material is lost somewhere, or there is an attack, or there is a crash, or there is a hard disk, or even the hard disk can crash. So I don't want to sound alarmist about this, but the digital archive cannot be at the cost of the physical archive. Wherever possible, we have to try and preserve the physical or the analog archive as much as possible. And the durability of certain kinds of analog archive are legion. I mean, if I may digress for just a minute or so, last night I finished reading a very long trilogy of science fiction novels, which I've been reading for the last 6 or 7 months, of 3 or 4 months, called The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu, the great Chinese. It's one of the greatest science fiction, and there's a horrible Netflix series on that right now. And towards the end, when the Earth is about to be, when the solar system is in great danger, there is a museum which is created to preserve whatever can be preserved of the human and the solar system. And eventually they find that none of the technologies that they think of are going to work. They finally carve it on stone. Stone carving, this is one character called Doji, who says that I have gone through every technology possible, and this is the only one which will stay for one. So they're looking at increasing number of years, so 1 million years, 1 billion years. So and Chishenliu thinks in these scales: 1 billion years in the future. What is going to remain of human civilization, and can there be some kind of trace left behind it? And eventually, that committee concludes only the longest lasting form of storage would be stone carving. Now, it is completely counterintuitive that you are going back perhaps to the oldest form of human data storage, which is stone carving on stone. But you will find that I don't want to give away spoilers. It's an extraordinary imaginative feat what Chishenliu lies in this now. But it is also concerned with the question of conservation of knowledge, conservation of human history when the solar system is gone, when in fact this universe is gone, what remains? So, coming back to the 1890s and 1910s, these are again moments where we look back on certain things and decide how we can store these things. And in the case of India, I think, or South Asia, there is a peculiar paradox which Graham Shaw, British Library, has also commented on, is that if you look at the manuscript output of South Asia compared to print, often manuscripts are fared better than print. Those of us who have worked in 19th century print will know how difficult it is to find a certain printed book or a certain printed journal. Newspapers have all gone. Most of the newspapers you cannot find. Most of the journals you only find a few copies. Now this is again counterintuitive. You think that the printed and the more, because it is print, there will be multiple copies and they will survive. In fact, the survival rate of print is not very good, especially for 19th century India. Because India had a manuscript culture which was industrial in scale, and because the material with which we wrote manuscripts, palm leaf, the two kinds of palm leaf, was easily available, as opposed to the European parchment and vellum, which was a scarce resource. Many versions of manuscripts have survived in India. Again, those of you who are manuscriptologists will know more about me. But despite there's a lot of destruction and burnings and so on and forth, manuscripts have survived. Print, sometimes, in fact, strangely and paradoxically, has often disappeared. There are many books we know of. It's impossible to find even a copy anywhere in the world. Now, this is something which makes the task of conservation of the immediate past even more compelling. And I think in the case of South Asia, in the early 20th century, the move towards digitization began when digital technologies became easier to, anyone could take pictures with their mobile phone or for camera and so on and forth. And therefore we find that a number of independent initiatives took place at that time. One remembers this excellent work done by the West Bengal Public Library Network. All of that material which was on a DSpace, now part of the National Digital Library of India, was for many people the first kind of encounter with digital corpora. These were not digitized very rigorously in that the resolutions were low. There were each of the books were often split up into 3 or 4 PDFs, but we knew the reason for that. We did not have 4G, 5G, or even 3G at that time. Bandwidths were low, data planes were expensive. So the material was digitized in fairly low resolution files so that they can be downloaded on one's device easily. That changed, and we know that when we started working with the British Library on the Endangered Archives program, the School of Cultural Textual Records has now got 10 such programs, 10 such projects with the EAP. We knew that there were certain good practices, certain protocols, both with creating the digital archive as well as processing it and then making it available for scholarly use. So you have the raw capture, and the processing, the metadata, and the dissemination of such files, and these all followed a particular sequence of practices. And we also realized that these are practices which are ideal, but which are perhaps not always possible in certain cases. So especially when you are carrying out digitization in places where, in challenging environments, so let us say somewhere where there's a lack of electricity, if you're working with that, or there's a lack of light, or there's a lack of space, what do you do? How do you solve these problems? And this, of course, is part of this project is our experience with Endangered Archives program was to also solves these problems as they arose. You cannot foresee all these problems. I mean, sometimes, for example, with the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which we are currently working, or perhaps even the Mahabodhi Society, these conditions are, these are institutions who can provide ideal conditions. They can provide a proper workplace, proper environment. But in many cases, you have to work with severely challenging environments. So how do you create solutions for these? And that is also part of, I think, excitement of working in a project like this. It's not just mechanical, not just going and setting up your camera and your light and just doing it, but also solving problems as they emerge. And so there would be one set of challenges with archives with, let us say, text, with a literary nature, which are two-dimensional. What do you do with sound? What do you do with three-dimensional objects? We have faced this challenge recently while doing a crowd-funded project, not supported by any funding body, that of the archives of the great hockey player and Olympian Gurbakh Singh. Gurbakh Singh, as you know, was the captain of India during the 1960 Olympics, in which India won gold, and has been associated with Indian hockey for a very long time. Now, Gurbakh's archives, one of the very few that we have of hockey players, is exhaustive, and he has complete or almost near total recall of all the, if they photograph 5 people standing from left to right, who are these people? And you don't have the names all the time. And all these stories that Gurbakh was also able to tell, and all the objects of a sports person's life. So a ball from the 1972 Olympics, or a hockey stick with which he played in the 1964 Rome Olympics, or even in one case, an Indian flag which was left abandoned after the march past ceremony, the passing out ceremony. So there was somebody carries the flag. That flag was left lying around. So he packed it up and brought it back. Now therefore, when you digitize such an object, you tell the story behind it. And in the case of a sports person, these stories become, each object has a story. Now, when we were looking at these, we have still not digitized the three-dimensional objects. I mean, you think of the range of three-dimensional objects that is possible in a sports person's life: a hockey stick, a medal, a blazer, a hockey ball, pair of shoes. Almost every object is a 3D object. Think of a cricketer, think of an athlete. So, but it's not easy to do three-dimensional imaging. It is possible, but it is expensive. You have to take many more pictures, you have to use software. But these are also objects which have lives of their own and which require to be digitized with whatever tools that we have at our disposal. So this our experience of working with a sports person is now creating new challenges for us. Earlier we worked with sound, which of course had its own challenge. Sound is very challenging to work with. Then paper, so it could be manuscript, it could be print, it could be photograph, it could be a negative. These are various kinds of two-dimensional objects that you can work with. Sound is complex. You work with a number of medias. And, two of our most flagship projects were working with the archives of North Indian classical music. The other thing which also, the other aspect of this work, and which is again one of the more complicated aspects, is questions of copyright and ownership. Now, when you're looking at 19th century or material before Indian independence, you are almost secure in the knowledge that there are no copyright issues. So let us say a magazine or a journal printed by the Mahabodhi Society will certainly be out of copyright. So there is no author who has written an article in that magazine is likely to object to say that the right still belongs to me. But recently we have applied to the Modern Endangered Archives program, sister program of the EAP, which is handled by the University of California, Los Angeles, for the Little Magazine Library Archive of Shondip Dutta. Now you know that is very famous in off College Street, Shondip Dutta passed away very recently, and amassed this extraordinary archive of little magazines, some 80,000 items, and all of them kept stored in 3 rooms. During his lifetime, Sri Dutta was resistant to the idea of digitization. I'm not going to go into that, but now the family and the trust which looks after the archive has asked us to collaborate with them on the project. Now we have applied for the funding, we don't yet know whether we'll get it. But you see, the problems only begin then. And most of these journals are in copyright. But as far as little magazines are concerned, who really is the proprietor? Who does the intellectual property belong to? Is it the editor? Is it the contributors? Is it a collective? in many cases it may not even be possible to trace some very short-lived journal which came out of somewhere in Mofussil or or outside Bengal. So this is the part of the challenge is also to get in touch with all these stakeholders and try and identify them. And then only then can we think of even, I mean, the digitization can happen and the cataloging can happen, you know. So also that, I mean, those of you who use the Little Magazine Library will know that the storage and the, the way in which the magazines were kept was also unique scheme. So they were they were classified according to subject matter. So agriculture, there were a bunch of magazines under agriculture or Mednipur or whatever. So now that doesn't work if you're going to do, if you're going to catalog according to issue, according to number. So these are all hugely challenging tasks. I mean, in the first year we have applied only to do the art cataloging, and for one person to actually do the liaison with the stakeholders to see whether they are at all agreeable. I mean, if they say no, we don't want to be part of this, so we cannot then put this online, right? So, and this is a particularly problematic question in the case of sound. In the North Indian Classical Music Archive, nearly 7,000 hours that Professor Ramlan Das Gupta and his team digitized, almost all of it is unpublished music. In other words, these were recitals given by great masters in somebody's house, so Parikul Ali Khan or Alauddin Khan Sahib. Now, again, who does this belong to? Let us say a 3-hour recital by Mallikarjun Mansoor in somebody's residence, which has never been published. That physical material belongs to the owner or the collector. So it could be a cassette, it could be a spool, it could even be a video cassette. That physical object belongs to the owner. But the song, the performance belongs to the creator and or the creator's heirs. So it is impossible to put such material online because you are violating a number of, if you do so without consent, you are violating a number of ownership issues. They are not just of the singer or the artist, but also of the person who owns the recording. And then again, this question of ownership can be a contested one. Let us say a company like HMV or Columbia, whatever, they may own a particular, they may have published a record, 33, 45 or 78 RPM. What do you do? I mean, and there the ownership is clear. Either it belongs to the company or it belongs to the singer or the performer. But in the case of unpublished material, it is almost, this problem is almost impossible to solve. Very recently we digitized out of a spool, a very damaged spool, some 25-26 songs by Deobrat Bishwas, sung for his doctor, sung for a particular doctor. He said, look, I can't pay your fees, but I'll just sing for you. That family member brought along that spool. A whole 2-hour recital by Deobrat Bishwas. Now, you know, what do you do with that material? I mean, how do you make it, how does one do research on it? Can it be made public? I mean, these are very difficult questions. Or field notes. If you go to interview someone as an ethnomusicologist or an anthropologist, again, who does that belong to? If you took somebody's interview, do you have to have consent from that person in order to make it available to a wider public? So sound is a very, very difficult area to work in. And you know, this is our own experience. I mean, I'll give another example. And this is perhaps better known. In 1967, in All India Radio Akashvani, there was a program which was facilitated by Adrish Bardhan, the science fiction writer. It was called Shobuj Manush. And in Shobuj Manush, he invited 4 writers to all contribute a short story and read it out on the theme Shobuj Manush. And this is 2 years before the moon landing. So those 4 people were Satyajit Ray, Devendra Mitra, Adrish Bardhan and Dilip Rai Chaudhary. Now that recording has become legendary, and those stories were published later. Shobuj Manush, etc. You will find this in any anthology of all these 4 writers. But that broadcast was lost. If you go on YouTube, you will find other people have recreated that moment. But no one was able to make inquiries on All India Radio. But their archives are all over the place. You know, for example, when one speaks of state archives, even more, I think, heartrending is the case of Arundhati Devi, whose birth centenary is this year. I think her birthday was day before today. Is the birthday. But the Podibishir Moni Bakshu is gone. I asked her niece Tapati Thakurata, who's just written a piece on her, that ওই ছবিটি কোথায় গেল? ওটা it was shown once in Doordarshan, maybe the only place it remains in Doordarshan, but nobody has after that since Bodhivishe Bhumi fine. It's a wonderful. I think I don't know whether anyone saw it. I've seen it on when I was a child on television. It was beautiful. It is completely gone, unless it is there in somewhere in Doordarshan. Now coming back to Shobuj Manush. So again, Shobuj Manush we thought was lost forever. But Kalpabishwa, the science fiction group, which is very active in publishing and not just publishing, translating, also archiving science fiction, found after the death of Adrish Bardhan in his trunk a brown envelope which said, and there was a spool inside which said Shobuj Manush. So I said, okay, can this be the elusive Shobuj Manush? But they had no way to play a spool. This is the older spool system, but we at SCTR have a spool machine. So one day, Deep Ghosh of Kalpabishwa brought it over to our office, and Pradeep Dev, who actually does our sound technology, we played it and we found that after a few advertisements, it was indeed that famous 1967 Shobuj Manush and Satyajit Ray's baritone. We immediately realized that that was the moment. It was a very hair-raising moment that you could again listen to that. Then came the question of, can we make this public? Because this is after all the property of the state or India Radio, Prasar Bharati, whatever. So then I asked the ex-CEO of Prasar Bharati, Jawahar Sarkar, a friend of ours, that what do you do with it? Do we ask permission? Well, if you ask permission, you'll never get it. Okay. Best thing is not to do anything about it. I mean, the moment you try to do things, write to them and so on, for somebody will stop it. So the situation I told, I mean, it's still not public. Parts of it we have made, Kalpabishwa has been public, but the rest is, people can listen to it if they ask Kalpabishwa, but it is not been uploaded as yet because of this lingering issue of copyright. Property Akashvani's. So I'm sure in all these archives, Akashvani, Doordarshan, there are gems, there are absolute treasures. What does one do with them? I mean, this material that is languishing, perhaps sometimes being overwritten. But at a certain point, people also used to in order to save material, they used to overwrite on programs. So what do you do in such cases? I mean, it is small organizations, private institutions are now waking up to the possibility that this material should be digitized. But for large organizations, especially organizations like which are part of the state government, much more is required, and only government can do it. I mean, I think a private body cannot go and digitize material on that scale. But whether any government of the day is thinking about doing these things is a question we have to ask. I know that certain parts of the departments of the government are thinking of digitizing. For example, the West Bengal Secondary Council, Madhushika Parshad, we have had meetings with them on digitizing their material, especially to do with syllabus and question papers. They also have a very rich history of pedagogy and particularly question papers, policy documents, and so on and forth. So if in-house initiative can be taken by those organizations within the government, then at least these records can be saved. The Endangered Archives program or an organization such as SCTR or the ILSR can only intervene in certain areas fruitfully, especially smaller archives which are manageable. But for archives which are on a large scale, we need much more investment from the government and also a kind of sensibility about this. Nowadays, much of our work is done digitally. So we also have to think about policies to preserve the born digital archive. Again, the relationship between the digital archive and the printed archive is a fairly straightforward one. There is print, which is static, you digitize them. But what about born digital archives? Material which has been created in the digital format. That is a challenge which we still haven't really been talking about. How do you archive that? And that is even more difficult to archive because that material is ephemeral. They can be lost. The site might go down. A blog might disappear. A link might break. Somebody might just, delete their account. I mean, I'm talking about account. You think like of social media archives, or social media accounts. These are also kind of self-archiving. Your Twitter feed is also your self-archiving. Your Instagram feed is also an archive of yourself. So our understanding of what an archive is, what constitutes an archive, is also changing with the ease with which we can create digital material. But how do we also preserve our digital material? How do we also think about preserve our digital material? Or whether that control goes into the hand of corporations. Who owns the photographs you put up on Facebook or Twitter? Do we actually have a copy, or is it owned by that corporation? So these are some questions to which, of course, there are no easy answers, but I'm sure projects such as these will address this now and in the future. And thank you very much for allowing me to share these thoughts.